So this is Casey McBride with the NationalCrimeSyndicate.com. You can find me at FrankCostelloHistory.com and also at Uncle Frank's Place on Facebook. My co-host Mike Mafucci couldn't be here tonight, but I wanted to give everybody a reminder to check out his weekly column over at the NationalCrimeSyndicate.com, and it's called Dial M for Mob. He's been doing that. I think he's on episode 8 at this point, so we've had some real good episodes on that. So be sure to check out what he's been doing. And I also wanted to give a reminder of the upcoming Mob World Summit 2018 that's going to be held at the Plaza Hotel in Las Vegas, June 15th through 17th. I'm going to be a moderator at some of the panels there, and we've got some really good guest speakers, and it's going to include a tour of the Mob Museum in Las Vegas as well. So if you want more information about that, you can check out the NationalCrimeSyndicate.com, and you can also find more information on Frank's Place on Facebook as well. So tonight, I'm very pleased to have this guest with me. He's got a book out that I'm a big fan of, and he is also the director of the Gangster Museum of America in Hot Springs, Arkansas. His book is Hot Springs from Capone to Costello, and if that's not a title that would get somebody like me interested in a book, I don't know what is. But tonight we've got Robert Raines with us. How are you doing tonight, Robert?
I am very well. How are you, Casey?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I know you're traveling right now, so and it's taken us a couple of times to be able to hook up. We've had to reschedule, so I really appreciate you being flexible and taking the time to come on and do this. I guess where I'd like to start would be how did somebody become a director of a gangster museum? How did you do this? This seems like I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole process of how you would get something like this started. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole thing and what you did?
Sure. About 11 years ago, I wasn't from Hot Springs, actually born in Bethesda, Maryland, but lived in Arkansas most of my life. About 11 years ago, I went over to Hot Springs. I'm in Minnesota right now, so I kind of forget where I am moving around like this. But I went to Hot Springs to help a friend move over there who was buying a business. And it fascinated me. Central Avenue fascinated me. It was a really old, 100-and-something-year-old street with buildings that were still inhabited and lots of apartments and small shops, and it just fascinated me that the cops were still walking the beat. It was a very safe place, and so I decided, I was in the computer business, I decided I think I want to start something here. So next day I went to the director of tourism there in Hot Springs, which is our largest, was and is our largest tourist center in Arkansas. And he said, well, I told him I wanted to do a couple of things. I had a history of acquaintance with Steve Harrison, and I asked him I'd like to do something over here in Hot Springs and move over here. He said, well, there's 2 questions that people ask when they come here for conventions, and we have a lot of conventions. 1, can you still take a hot bath, a thermal bath? And 2, did Capone really come here? So I decided to take the Capone question, started researching it, and when I did, of course, I did find out that not only did he come here, he absolutely loved it and brought the entire outfit here with him and rented the 4th floor of the Arlington Hotel every time he came. He would even bring his 28 Cadillac armored car down here on a train and drive it around while he was here. And back in those days, they would stay for weeks at a time. It wasn't like now we go somewhere like I am this weekend and you stay a few days. Back then, you'd go and you'd pretty much just camp out for a while. But Capone would bring his entire outfit, and sometimes Ralph, and sometimes May, and even Sonny. I just recently got a picture on the wall at the museum of Sonny and Al in a little amusement park called Happy Hollow up the street from the Arlington Hotel. Nevertheless, the deeper I dug into Capone's history here there in Hot Springs, the more I learned about Hot Springs history. And the history of the town is just a microcosm of all of the great mob cities that are in America. One mayor elected in 1927 ran the town for 40 years with the help of a judge. Everyone thought he was a lawyer. He only attended college for 2 weeks, never took the bar association, but he practiced law for 45 years. And when Owney Madden moved here from New York in 1932 and married the postmaster's daughter, things really got organized. And it ran in a state to the point of $100 million a year with illegal gambling and prostitution in a state that doesn't, even to this day, allow gambling. It was just so widespread, and so it was before Las Vegas had water. You know, there were casinos in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Right. And the New York Times deemed it America's first resort. They did that back in the early 20s. And Hot Springs is mentioned in publications, old publications like The Great Gatsby. So Hot Springs was a really big deal, mainly due to the thermal baths. Bathhouse Row still exists. People still come and take baths. Penicillin knocked a pretty good hole in the bathing industry back in the 30s. But eventually it started coming back, and even to this day, we have people who come over and take regular baths in the bathhouses and throw away their arthritis medicine, at least according to them. We are on Bathhouse Row, so we see the spouses and family members because they come tour the museum while the other folks are taking baths. Nevertheless, the history of Hot Springs really infatuated me, the way it had gotten organized, and there was very little crime other than the crime of running gambling casinos and houses of prostitution in a state where it was illegal. Most of the governors would pawn it off and say, well, that's a local problem, if anyone really griped about it, and we'll turn it over to the sheriff, what we've heard, and they'll take care of it. And it rocked along pretty good. But when Madden came to town, having owned the Cotton Club and the Stork Club and the Phoenix Brewery and most of the big-time New York entities such as sanitation and the docks and the railroad depot, Madden, as a teenage English gangster who tutored Luciano and Costello and Siegel, and naturally, when he came here, he figured out a way to do it really quietly where everyone made money off of it, including the churches. So once he started dividing the gambling profits up amongst the governors, the legislature, the churches, then it was no one really cared whether it was illegal. So everyone made money, and no one considered it corrupt. So that's the fallacy that a lot of people, when they hear the history of Hot Springs, they think it was corrupt. Well, it wasn't really corrupt. It was just illegal. Everyone made money at it, and most old-time gamblers that wrote about Hot Springs wrote that it was a really, really fair game there. Betty Binion, all these big-time gamblers would come here, Nick the Greek and Benny Binion, and, of course, Costello owned a hotel there. They offered Frank the gambling czar job as late as the 60s, and he refused it by letter, and that letter was published in our state newspaper, the Arkansas Gazette. So Costello and Madden and Siegel and Lansky, and of course this was all after Capone, Giancana made a run at it in the early 60s to try to take it over and failed. Madden pretty much convinced him that he didn't really have any business there. So until 1967, it ran pretty good, and the FBI said that I think they started saying in 63 that it was $100 million a year gambling industry. Wow. Illegally. The mob backed one of the reasons for closure, at least according to some of the old timers that were in control back in those days. the mob was backing Nelson Rockefeller, and Winthrop Rockefeller, his little brother, was our governor. So it might be that Las Vegas had a little something to do with Winthrop Rockefeller closing gambling down, but it was a fairly harmless closing of it. I think most of the old timers were about ready to retire. They did go on after gambling closed here. No one was arrested, and no one did any money. They just said, boys, we're going to shut this down, and so they did.
Wow.
They went to Istanbul, Turkey, and bought a palace and went on for about another 10 years over there. The main guys did, but fascinating story, and it's just the people that came here. And it's not a legend because I've got thousands of FBI files. I've got the total files of Madden, the total files of Costello, Siegel. I've just got tons of FBI files that show that the FBI, of course, Luciano was arrested, picked up here.
Right.
Picked up there in Hot Springs. But he was picked up on federal property. We, as law enforcement officers here in Hot Springs, tried to keep him here on a traffic charge, although he had no vehicle. And after about 2 weeks, Thomas Dewey and New York Rangers came down and convinced the governor that we had to turn him over. So that's the last we saw of Lucky, darn it. There's still people alive. I've interviewed people for our documentaries that run in the museum that knew Luciano and, Siegel, and people knew him. Still people in their 80s that knew him. Frank Costello came here as late as the 70s. We still have Oakland Racetrack. And actually, it's got a casino in it. We don't really call it a casino, even though they play blackjack money with cards. The state is in on that, in as much as Oakland pays a pretty heavy voluntary sales tax. So gambling is still illegal, but we do have a racetrack and a gaming room, they call it. Not a casino.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, the thing about that town is if you're going to kind of get started in studying the mob history of it, you're getting a history of pretty much every city that the mob was involved with. You're not just getting New York, you're getting Chicago. You're like, everybody went there. So it's a great place to kind of just, it'll take you to pretty much every big name that was involved in that history. So
and the really interesting thing is the town looks exactly like it did back then.
Wow.
When those guys were here. The Arlington's still standing, just came under new ownership and is under some remodeling, and the bathhouses all have something in them. I mean, it was the first property that was set aside to be recreational federally, so it really was the first national park, even though it was named 14th. Huh. When they gave away the commemorative quarters for the national parks, they start in Hot Springs. So
wow.
The feds, as long as you stayed off of that federal property across Central Avenue, which was named one of the top 10 avenues in the country, by the way, by USA a couple of years ago. I mean, right up there with Wall Street and Bourbon Street. So Central Avenue is fairly well acknowledged all over the country.
Right.
The Gangster Museum was open a couple of years before the Mob Museum, and I like to feel that we actually helped them get that open because Mayor Goodman was having a little bit of a problem with a bond issue, and we kind of showed that the genre was a successful venture to get into.
Right.
And we were in communication with them to begin with. I think Oscar ended up spending a little more time on kind of the FBI and how they handle the mob rather than just the mob. He went with the FBI and the capture of the mob, and we kind of went with the mob on vacation.
Right. So Can you, like, how did you do that? Like, tell us a little bit about how you got that started. Like, I'm curious, did you have any resistance from people who didn't want you putting up a museum dedicated to something like that? Or, it seems like kind of a
really
difficult sell.
It wasn't so much a resistance as it was just a secret that they were so used to keeping in America that people didn't want to talk about it. And I wasn't sure at the time, maybe once I learned that Colonel Lynn Davis, the state police commander that closed everything down in October 1967, left $100 million in 1967 cash in the counting rooms at the casinos.
Wow.
So I thought maybe that money is still here and growing, and people just don't want to really expose that. But after I got going and I got a small museum open, and people saw that I was really just trying to tell the history of Hot Springs through the eyes of the mob, they kind of started coming out of the woodwork and telling me stories. And there were still 10 years ago. We've been in business for 10 years now. This is our 10th. So, gradually they started coming out and giving me interviews. Some people would give me a great interview and say, "No, I'm going to tell you something that you really can't tell until I die." And, most of them have passed away, so we re-edit.
Right.
And it's just, it's nothing earth-shattering. It's just stuff that they felt. I remember interviewing a guy in a nursing home. God, what is his name? Jimmy something or other. They all had nicknames. And he asked me why I was wanting to know these things, and I told him, and he had been sent to me by some other character, and he told me some fascinating stories. He was a dealer in the Southern Club. And he said, "Well, why do you want to know?" I said, "Well, I'd like to bring a camera in here and put some of this stuff down on tape, and we'll edit it, and I'll let you look at it, and you can have artistic license with it." I had to explain what that was to him. And then I'll roll these segments in the museum, and therefore you'll be telling the story for me, so I won't have to tell it myself. He said, "Oh, my God." He said, "Listen, there's a guy down in Hall C. If he knew I was talking to you, he'd roll down here and kill me right now."
Wow.
So here's a guy in a wheelchair, 95 years old, worried about another 95-year-old guy whacking him for just telling colorful stories about Hot Springs.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough. That's why what interests me so much about like what you're doing. It's hard enough to kind of get a business or something like that going anyway. But you're entering into something where everybody already doesn't want you to have the information that you're trying to put forth. So
Right.
It's an extra hurdle. And then, and sometimes it gets a negative image, which I understand. Not everybody is as interested in this history, but it is history, and there are a lot of people who are interested in it, which, I think places like what you have are proof of that. But now, how did you go?
Though, they kind of embrace it now, and most of the bars, like we have the oldest bar in Arkansas, is in Hot Springs, which naturally go along with everything else that happened there. And everyone now kind of embraces history. You'll see a lot of pictures of Capone and a lot of pictures that we have. We have over 200 photos of Hot Springs and mob figures in Hot Springs in the museum. So those are being pretty much promoted now everywhere in Hot Springs. So everybody's kind of on the bandwagon now.
Nice. That definitely makes it easier. Now, how did you go about getting things to put in there? That's another thing. It's it's a difficult kind of genre to find artifacts.
It's the strangest thing. Once I got to the point of them thinking I wasn't trying to just bust anybody out of their family inheritance, a lot of the equipment, especially the gambling equipment, were still out. We have 3 major lakes here, and they're massive lakes. One of them's 250 feet deep, and you can drink the water. It's crystal clear like Ouachita. And then we have another lake that has multi-million-dollar homes built on it. That's just massive, 25-mile-long lakes that were formed by damming up a river for power reasons. And a lot of the equipment, when they closed the gambling down in 1967, all went to these lake houses. And so people started calling me going, you know, I've got a roulette table that came out of the Southern in 1965.
Oh,
would you be interested in it? And, you know, I'd get it into an area I could afford. So all of the equipment, at least the gambling equipment I had in our antique casino, it all came from local clubs. Now, once we got on the internet at tgmoa.com, people would call me from all over the world. A guy sent me a picture, and it's a rare picture, of Frank Costello's booking shot, April Fool's Day, 1936, in Hot Springs, Arkansas. It's dated.
Oh, wow.
We had never seen it in Hot Springs. We knew that it existed, but he was from the Netherlands. He had inherited his grandfather's trunk, who came to Hot Springs a lot from the Netherlands. And he just sent me a copy of it and asked me if I'd like the original photo. And I said, absolutely.
Oh,
and
man,
that's happened all over the country. People send me stuff. I've got stuff that, the Lanskys were going through some house cleaning down in Miami, and their lawyer called me and were able to get some stuff to me that, you know, just really interesting stuff that.
Oh, yeah.
That nobody had really ever seen, just family stuff. Deirdre Capone helped me open the Capone Gallery with some great family photos they had of Al and Ralph. And so, I don't know, it just kind of, I don't know how we did it, to tell you the truth. To this day, it's just like sometimes musicians look up and go, they're playing in Carnegie Hall, and they just pause and go, how in the hell did I get here? But, you know, it's successful, and we're just happy. I came up here to Minnesota. William Ham, Alvin Karpus, who was a great bank robber planner, kidnapped William Bremer out of and William Ham, the guys that ran the Ham Beer Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And Alvin Karpus was married to Grace Goldstein, who had, in the 1930s, one of the largest houses of prostitution there right next to the Arlington. And so we have Alvin was there quite a bit. And that brought Dillinger and brought the Barkers and brought a lot of heat down there also, because Hoover really got irked at the bank robbers and the outlaws. So Madden had a tough time. Matter of fact, we're working on a series right now. I can't say a lot about it, but we've got a pretty good crew going for a series called Hot Springs that starts with the outlaws. Madden really didn't want these guys in town because it brought Hoover in town. So that's the premise of where the series starts.
Wow.
But it'll be a major Hollywood production once we get started on it. Hopefully we'll get it cast and start shooting somewhere in September, but we've been having a lot of meetings about it.
Oh, I'd be all over that. I can't wait. I hope.
Oh yeah, Bonnie and Clyde Bonnie and Clyde's last run, they left Joplin after a shootout and came down there to put Bonnie in the tubs, and she had been injured in a car wreck, and their own car wreck. And then they went to Giveland, Louisiana after that, where the end came. So this was kind of the next to the last stop they had. So we got, of course, the Outlaw Gallery has a lot of Bonnie and Clyde stuff. We have one of the 3 death masks of Dillinger that was sold to us by the great grandson of the lady who actually was in charge of the autopsy in Indiana.
Oh.
And a great author, William J. Helmer. He's a good friend of mine down in Texas. He was one of the first editors of Playboy. So He's got great history. He's written tons of books on Dillinger, and not able to really get around anymore. Or I know he would be at. He also offered the True Crime Almanac, Public Enemy Almanac, I think is the title of that book. Great book he and Rick Maddox wrote. But anyway, I kind of just ran into, Antoinette Giancana's a buddy of mine now, and Meyer Lansky's grandson, Meyer the second.
Right.
Deirdre, Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo's kids who still live there in Vegas sent me stuff. I was out there in Vegas when they were trying to start, or while they were building kind of a mob museum over at the Tropicana.
Yeah, right.
And Meyer was involved in an investment standpoint on that, and I don't know whatever happened to that. I think it just didn't work,
I
the way
think
they were
most of
trying
it
to
got
do
absorbed with the new museum. Like it kind of, most of the stuff I think that was over there when the new mob museum came up, they kind of just, transferred a lot of that over there, and now that's kind of the main one. But
I'm going to try to come to the mob summit out there, by the way, in June.
Oh, that would be great.
Maybe we'll be able to hook up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will definitely be there. I'll be helping out with some of the panels and stuff. But I think, excuse me, it's nice to know though that these family members that you have contact with, that they kind of give you their support and the thumbs up for what you're doing. Because that can go the other way, A lot of times it can be like they don't want anything to do with it or anything. But, like we said, it's a big part of our history in this country. And a really, from an entertainment, standpoint, it's fascinating stuff. The stories are great. So it's nice to know that they're
really
kind of supporting you.
Yeah, we don't, in the Gangster Museum, we don't really talk much about the crime that these guys committed. And if you've met, I'm sure you have, if you've met some of the children and grandchildren of some of these guys, and girls, because there are some girls, Edna Murray, the Kissing Bandit, was a bank robber, and Machine Gun Kelly's wife was pretty notorious.
Right.
Actually gave him the name Machine Gun Kelly. So, but the offspring of these folks didn't really see them the way we grew up seeing them because of the movies. Deirdre, for instance, Al, after he got out of prison, he lived 9 more years. And he taught her how to swim and fish and ride a bike. And, you just don't. It's a little closer to Tony Soprano than it is Jack the Ripper,
Absolutely.
And that's one thing that fascinated me about the two sides of all of these guys had two sides to them. Most of them were Catholic. Most of them went to church every Sunday, went to confession on Saturday, which that should have been a long day at the office. And but they just had multiple faceted lives that it's kind of hard to wrap their head around.
Yeah, you have a couple parts in your book that I really liked that you illustrate that. And one, there's a great story of Anastasia and Costello and Owney Madden that I won't give it away. People, you've got to get the book and check it out. And you also have something that you say kind of about the retirement of Owney Madden and Frank Costello, how they were still able to hit a golf ball and still able to sit at the Arlene Hotel and talk about the old times. And,
Frank, even after being shot in the head in the elevator, it glanced him. He was going to get shot in the head if he hadn't dodged it. But nevertheless, he still kind of remained friends with that. I mean, they ended up getting Genovese back, but the guys that were responsible for that, the actual pulling off of that, ended up here in Hot Springs at the same time Frank Costello was. So they must have made up. Yeah,
it's a fascinating story. It's one you couldn't make up. But it's interesting with Owney Madden and Frank. You don't get to tell the story very often of guys in that profession that made it as long as they did, that actually do retire and become old men. And they have that other side of their life. So
and I've got there's some great script that was written by Glenn Kulikowski in the series, Hot Springs, that kind of that shows a lot of conversation. 3 old guys sitting around at the Arlington on the veranda, watching the traffic go by, and talking about the old days and smoking cigars, and it's really based on what their grandkids told us about their interactions after they were out of the business.
Right.
And those are some great conversations that even though they're made up, it kind of follows a pretty comedic look at how old mobsters might have conversed while they're sitting having a cigar talking about the old days.
Oh, yeah, I would love it.
The nice thing about Hot Springs and why all the mob loved it, there's a couple of reasons. One, when Owney moved here in 1932, all of the jazz musicians from the Cotton Club came here to play. I mean, even into the 50s and 60s, we had Phyllis Diller had a regular gig here. Liberace had a regular gig here. Spring training baseball started in Hot Springs. All of the teams, the mob came from towns where had Major League Baseball teams. So all of the stars were down here during spring training. Yeah. So that was just another attraction for them. But it was totally peaceful here. Very little crime. I say in one of my interviews that there were no bank robberies here for 40 years in Hot Springs because all the bank robbers were here on vacation.
Right. True.
So it's just it's a fascinating place, and it every day it gets more fascinating because people will bring something in or tell me a story that I've got to, hit the road corroborating or trying to. And
right.
Some of the stories are getting old where there's not many people left alive that I can kind of cross paths with that can make it be real for me if I don't really have 3 or 4. Kind of use the A&E biography formula. If you don't get 3 sources from different areas that are going to kind of tell you the same story, at least it needs to dovetail pretty closely.
Right.
Then you just don't repeat it, because the Gangster Museum, we kind of pride on no legend being in there. Pretty much all fact told by the people who lived it.
Right. And it's great that you've done this, that you, like you're saying, time is short. Those people aren't going to be around forever. And the people who did know those guys, that era is ending. So that somebody has taken the time to actually get these stories and document it, it's great. I mean, I love that you're doing it.
Well, hopefully you get to come to Hot Springs one day, and we may end up, who knows, we may end up having a little mob renaissance in the Spa City.
It would be a great place for it.
Move that promotion around a little bit.
That would be great.
One interesting thing about Hot Springs, another interesting thing is Estes Kefauver, who, of course, commandeered the Kefauver hearings, was a math teacher in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
That's right.
And he got ran out of town for getting drunk at Belvedere and having to take a cab in. So he was engaged to a girl, and her parents ran him off. He went to Tennessee and ran for public office, and later became a senator. But just in case, John McClellan was put as chair of that committee, so they never had a hearing in Hot Springs. They went all around it, but they never came to Hot Springs. While the hearings were going on, the tables were spinning. So
imagine why that is. That's great. So, hey, Robert, now what do you got coming up in the future? So you're doing this, this series perhaps, and like anything else that you got coming up, and tell us a little bit about where people can find you, like at your website for the museum and things like that.
Well, the main website is tgmoa.com, which is the abbreviation for the Gangster Museum of America. And, of course, they can always call the museum 7 days a week, 501-318-1717. My email is director@tgmoa.com. So I'm pretty accessible there. We're moving around a lot because there's always a lot of research that goes into trying to find out the truth. And but I'll try to. There's a Facebook page, of course. I don't really check that a lot, but we do have people that look at it and notify me and that I need to respond to something. Because I am 66, and Facebook came when I was about 56. Nevertheless, a great thing to be on. I understand why people get hooked on it, but
yeah,
I don't have time to run a computer that long. Yeah,
it's hard to keep up on
but
all
that's
that.
the easiest three ways to get a hold of me, and we've had a website called Capone Days that we've been trying to put together for a while, but Hot Springs is so busy, it's hard to get time in the convention center because, I mean, this weekend we've got 1,000 Corvettes in town, National Corvette Convention. We have Harley Hog Rally once a year in Hot Springs. I mean, literally every weekend of the year, there's something in Hot Springs. We have about 7 million visitors a year, and we have 32,000 people that live there.
Wow.
So it's a really popular tourist destination, especially for the surrounding states. You know, Texas. I mean, you either come to Hot Springs because we have, water parks. We got a racetrack. American Pharoah was our most recent Triple Crown winner, and we have the gaming room, and that $680 million a year non-gambling casino, and so there's a lot of other stuff to do there. I mean, we have a lot of bass fishing tournaments, Bassmasters class, but still it's all about history. I mean, Hot Springs is all about history, seeing and feeling the vibe of how people, what the first resort area in the country looked like. Back in that day, like I was saying earlier, Vegas had no water until the Hoover Dam was built, and Florida was pretty much Seminole Indians, and it was just hardly any way to get to California. One of the interesting things I found out in this study was Ralph and Al Capone had a casino. Their only really casino they were involved with was in Palm Springs called Paradise.
Wow.
But it was so costly for them to try to fly out there because it took way too long to drive. They actually flew out there, and they just couldn't control it, so they got out of that business.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. A friend of mine, Tim Venturi, lives out there, and, of course, he's too young to know about that, but his dad, Ken, who also played golf in Hot Springs, Ken Venturi.
There was a lot of activity in Palm Springs that you don't really hear much about. I know Frank Costello even had some dealings out there too. So it's another one of those kind of untapped gems. Frank
owned the Jacktar Hotel in Hot Springs, which is a little bit around the corner. It was on Park Avenue, a little bit around the corner from Central Avenue, and that was the longest run of the federal bath water, the federal hot water that by the time Frank and Owney came along, the thermal water was controlled by the federal government, and he talked some senators into approving a pretty long run through the mountain of the water, and Jacktar was quite a hotel that had a room there that Mickey Rooney played in called the Rainbow Lounge.
Oh wow!
And it was a fascinating place. Now it's a senior citizen home. It's still standing, about a 6-story hotel around the corner from Central Avenue.
Wow.
And there was also a Jacktar in Galveston. So,
man, this sounds like a town
Galveston
that I definitely...
was kind of tied in with Hot Springs.
Yeah. It's definitely on my bucket list. One of my places. I've been to now New Orleans and New York. Haven't been to Chicago yet, but I think Hot Springs is definitely my next little.
Yeah, you need to come. Give me a call. We'll put you up at the Arlington, and you'll feel just like you're in it. We have a great hat store in the Gangster Museum called the Hattery, which was Grace Goldstein's whorehouse, and also it was a hat store. And we sell a lot of fedoras. I tell you.
Nice, yeah. I bet you do.
Yeah, we do.
Well, great, Robert. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, like I said. And anytime you've got something coming up, when you get a little bit farther along with this project that you're talking about, give me a call and we'll put it up at the NCS and all that. And
great.
And you have yourself a great night.
Good deal. I hope to see you in June in Vegas.
Absolutely, my friend. We'll talk to you then.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.